You did this one? Oh.
Welcome, everyone. This is the second of 3 webinars on state efforts to count all kids. I'm going to now turn it over to Flo Gutierrez from the Kids Count Project at the Annie Casey Foundation to kick us off. If you are, please mute your phone. We are getting some static, some noise from people, and this is being recorded, so we want to keep the sound quality good. Flo, it's your turn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As a foundation, for those who don't know who the Annie Casey Foundation is, we're really focused on making sure that all children have access to opportunity, that they have the opportunity to grow up safe, to grow up healthy, and to grow up economically secure. We want to really make sure that all children have a strong background and a strong foundation so that they can thrive into adulthood. We understand that the census is really critical to this work. It's critical to our ability to really track how we're doing in providing services to children, how we can track where we should be investing. It also really is connected to the resources that states, that communities receive to make sure that children have the foundation. It's connected to services like WIC, Medicaid, food nutrition programs, and Head Start. So it really is critical to establish that foundation. So for us, making sure that we count all our young children is a priority. And we wanted to host this series of webinars so that folks can learn from what's happening in the states so that they can start engaging and getting ideas on how they can do some of this work where they live. And really our hope is that we get more people educated on the issue and as allies in the work. So I'm just going to introduce today's speakers. First off, we have Amy Swan, who's a senior policy analyst with Kentucky Youth Advocates. She's going to talk about what they're doing in their state in the absence of having funding to do the work. Then we'll hear from Denise Tanada, who's the Executive Director of Children's Advocacy Alliance in Nevada, who's going to talk about the work that they're doing with the State Census Commission. And then we'll hear from Margaret Nimon Holland, who's the Executive Director of Voices for Virginia's Children, who's going to talk about their involvement with the Complete Count Committee in their state and how they're going to be involved with the Get Out the Count efforts moving forward in Virginia. So with that, I just want to thank all of you for being here and for the speakers for taking the time to share with us what they're doing, and I'll turn it over to Amy. Thank you.
Hello. I guess I should advance the slide there. So, okay, there's a lag in the slide advance, I think. Okay, well, hopefully the right slide will show up here in a second. In the meantime, for those who aren't familiar with Kentucky Youth Advocates, really quick, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan child advocacy organization in Kentucky that prides itself on not taking government funds of any kind in order to remain a voice for Kentucky's kids. Like most Kids Count organizations, we do a lot of data collection and reporting and making it easily accessible to the public, but we also do a lot of research and other publications and a lot of public policy advocacy. And, well, maybe I need to use, okay. And as Flo mentioned, we actually don't have any government or private funding dedicated to the 2020 census effort in Kentucky right now. We do have a statewide complete count committee, and we have about 25 to 30 of our 120 counties in the state having a local complete count committee, although some of them haven't even really kicked off yet. And so with a lack of investment, whether it's, for our state government CCC, our local community CCCs, or even us as advocates on the issue, to do this work, we've been trying to get creative. And so that's what I wanted to share with you today is some of the more unique activities that we've been engaging in. We've also been doing, obviously, kind of the usual stuff that most folks on the call are probably doing, blog posts and social media about the importance of the census and creating job recruitment. We've been doing letters to our federal and state policymakers about it. We've been doing presentations at conferences. That's one thing that I'd highly recommend. I'm actually going to be presenting this Friday to the Kentucky School Board Association at their annual conference, one of their breakout sessions, and we've done the early childhood providers in the state with the school social workers. So the sooner we can get them aware of what the issues are and how they can get involved better. And I want to really quick give a shout out. I know she registered for this webinar. I don't know if she's on it. She literally just wrapped up her own webinar on the topic and is off to Nashville for work. But we have a state partnership specialist in Kentucky from the Census Bureau who's just been amazing, and her name is Michelle Ellison. And I have to give her a big shout out because, frankly, a lot of these ideas that I'm going to talk with you about came from her, or in the very least we've worked with her on them. And so first I'm going to talk about a variety of things where we've been working with schools. Hopefully you're familiar. If not, please check it out with the Census Bureau Statistics in Schools program. They have curriculum ready to go, in the classroom. This is, math, science, social studies curriculum for a variety of grade levels. And the great thing about it, and the way that we've been able to convince teachers to take a look at it and start using it, is by explaining them that it is aligned with Common Core standards and guidelines, so they don't worry about that. And we actually created a Facebook event promoted with the Census Bureau on during Constitution Week of last year, which is in September, and I'll talk more about that as an opportunity in a second. But in order to start raising awareness of this with teachers and students, because the more that teachers and students are familiar with the Census Bureau in general and the importance of, how all that data that comes from the Census Bureau is used, the more likely they are to be excited come, spring 2020 time when we're asking people to fill out surveys to go home and be excited about their household filling out the survey correctly. So we've been really pushing the Statistics in Schools materials. Through that, a ripple effect is that our largest school district in the state, our only truly urban area, in the process of creating a social studies curriculum to use next school year that's going to use the census. And something we'd like to do more this upcoming school year with schools is doing art competitions with census as a theme. You can see here, this is a bulletin board from Letcher County Elementary School in Kentucky that again was spurred from that Facebook event we pushed out to the K-12 in Kentucky during Constitution Week last week. I think it's just about the cutest bulletin board focused on the 2020 census that I've ever seen. Admittedly, it's also the only one I have ever seen, but that's something we'd like to do a lot more of. And also want to talk about kind of working the calendar. So Constitution Day week, that's September 17th and the week of September 17th. And if you're not aware, because I wasn't, it's good to know that there's actually a mandate that every educational institution in the country that receives federal funds has to have some sort of Constitution Day activity. Well, guess what's in the Constitution? The decennial census, the mandate to do that every 10 years to count everyone living in the U.S. So it's a great opportunity, again, to push things like statistics in schools or art competitions in your school systems, to bring in speakers, et cetera. I've got a picture of our state capitol here, and that's because something we're excited about is that our state House and Senate chambers are in the process of drafting up a joint state resolution on the 2020 census. And, so while a resolution doesn't really do all that much, I mean, it's the reason why we're excited is it's going to be a media event opportunity. And so, the fancy signing, of that is going to occur right around 1 year out, April 2019, from the April 2020 census kickoff. And so that's a good media opportunity. Also, we're looking at what are big events going on across the state in the spring. And if you know anything about Kentucky, you've probably heard of the Kentucky Derby, and that occurs the first weekend in May. And there is an entire festival that leads up to that for about a month, starting in April. And so Michelle has worked with the National Processing Center of the Census Bureau that's right across the bridge from Louisville, and has applied for a float that riffs on the Pegasus theme of the Kentucky Derby Festival called Pegacensus. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that we get that. Even if we don't, making that outreach has led to a presentation opportunity to the Kentucky Derby Festival Board. And so, again, any way that we can get them to partner in 2019 is great, because that can really ways to raise awareness about all the great job opportunities available in the state, and go ahead and grease the wheel for even bigger and better partnerships in 2020. We've got people that come from not only all over the state, but all over the country for the Kentucky Derby, and so it seems like that would be a huge opportunity to waste. So getting really creative about how to do that. And then I know I talked really quickly, but I am out of time. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kick it over to Denise in Nevada. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. This is Denise Tanada. As was mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Children's Advocacy Alliance. So we're also a member of the Partnership for America's Children, as well as one of the newer Kids Count grantees. So we're excited to be here today. I'm going to start with just giving you, I think it's important as we talk about this to understand the Nevada landscape a little bit, because it plays in a lot with the efforts that we've made in moving forward our census advocacy efforts, particularly the political landscape heading into our activities. So historically, Nevada's been a very conservative state, often being referred to as having a Wild West mentality. And it's only been in the past several years that we've begun to see a shift in the political makeup of our state. So last year, as we were beginning to work on our census advocacy, we were also in the midst of a gubernatorial race, and we're expecting a high turnover in the makeup of our state legislature. As the slide shows, the elections resulted in a turnover of political power from a Republican to a Democratic governor, as well as the shift to a Democratic control of both legislative houses, including something I'm very proud of, that Nevada became the first state with a female majority legislature. But it's also important to note that in Nevada, our legislature meets only once every 2 years for 120 days. So our current legislative session, which began on February 4th, will end on June 3rd. So it gives us a very short window for moving forward policy in this area. So this was important for us in developing our timeline for advocacy efforts around the 2020 census. Other considerations, which you'll see on the screen, include Nevada's heavy reliance on federal funding. For many of our social service programs, there's very little state investment, at least historically. We're hoping to change that moving forward. So as such, Nevada tends to rank very low on most social indicators, as reflected in our 2018 Nevada Children's Report Card, where Nevada earned an overall grade of D. I next wanted to talk about our efforts to position our organization as a lead census advocate. Because at least here, and I don't know if others are experiencing the same thing, we did get some kind of questions in the beginning about why our organization was doing this, even from my board of directors, about why we were taking this on as a priority. So for us, it was really important as we began to spend a lot of time conducting research, collecting data, and developing the key messaging that would not only address the current Nevada landscape, but also highlight why the Children's Advocacy Alliance was in a position to be a leader on this issue in our state. We found that collecting Nevada-specific data was also very important. Our policymakers and advocates needed to see how this issue would impact our state, our residents, and ultimately our state budget. Our key messages really focused on the undercount of young children, emphasizing that young children were the largest undercount population in the country and knowing the reasons why they were the largest population. We also worked very closely and continue to with the state demographer's office to identify a per-person cost to the state of Nevada, and this allowed us to formulate messaging that was targeted to key stakeholders, policymakers, and others within our state. We also utilized national mapping programs to identify the hard-to-count census tracts so we could target messaging in our outreach activities with key stakeholders and policymakers to show them how it impacted their districts. And then we also have been conducting key stakeholder meetings, which were key in this effort, because we wanted to position ourselves very early on with others that were working on this issue, as well as those who we knew would have an interest. So examples include the demographer's office. We've also been working very closely with local jurisdictions who head up the local complete count committees. And similarly to Amy, we're working very closely with our Nevada-based U.S. Census Bureau staff. We've also integrated the census into all of our community outreach efforts and presentations, so there's a natural alignment in all of our key issue areas of health, education, and safety. So we've developed messaging and identified federal funding that aligns with each of those areas so that when we're going out, people understand how it directly impacts the work that they're doing. And then lastly, and probably most important, for our immediate goal of developing a state commission and having funds allocated was meetings with individual legislators leading up to the 2019 legislative session. So achieving bipartisan support was really a top priority, particularly last year as we were heading into the election and weren't sure what the outcome would be. So as such, we included information and advocacy regarding the census in all of our GOTV efforts. As I mentioned, we spent over 1 year meeting individually with legislators to educate them on our issues, including the 2020 census, as well as to feel out support for putting forward a Nevada 2020 census bill and corresponding appropriation. Our request for a bill sponsor is actually very targeted. Over the years and the work that we've done, we've been able to develop some strong relationships with several legislators. So it's important to work with someone who not only knew and trusted us, but who held a leadership position and was well positioned to push forward a bill with a large fiscal note. We ultimately decided to work with Senator Joyce Woodhouse, who is chair of our Senate Finance Committee. And so she's now carrying the bill, which actually was just introduced a couple days ago. And we also knew that it was important to focus on getting the funding allocated. That was going to be our biggest fight in Nevada. So we made efforts during campaign season to meet with campaign staff to talk about the issue. And then once our new governor, Governor Sisolak, was elected, we had those established relationships, so we're able to set up meetings with his transition staff and members of his team. And we put forward the 2020 census as one of our high priorities. Ultimately, as a result of those meetings, the governor did include our ask of a one-time $5 million appropriation to support the Nevada 2020 census outreach efforts in his executive budget. So now our efforts are really turned to continue to advocate to ensure that the appropriation and the corresponding Census Commission bill are approved by the legislature and have the composition and duties that they're required. So as I said, although we've made great progress, our efforts still continue to secure the legislation and funding to support a complete count and to ensure children are a top priority for our outreach efforts. So due to our previous efforts, CAA is now able to participate in all of the currently established local complete count committees, and will be making efforts to provide some level of leadership on those committees. And in doing so, we're making sure that children in our state are represented. We're able to connect with our partners across the state who are working and serving children to make sure that those they're all included in those outreach efforts. As I mentioned before, we're also working closely with our local U.S. Census Bureau staff, in particular that we are creating opportunities for them to conduct outreach and engagement with our child-serving populations. So, for example, one of the groups that we facilitate is our Child Welfare Network. So it's a group of public and private entities that work on child abuse and neglect issues. Our U.S. Census Bureau staff rep will be coming out and giving a presentation to that group to talk specifically about counting and engaging youth who are in out-of-home placements and at-risk youth. Communication is also very key for this. So as we've been working over the past couple of years now, we've developed a listserv of key stakeholders, those who are interested, those who we've talked to before, and we're providing regular updates as well as seeking input from those individuals to keep everyone not only informed but also engaged in the process. And then finally, due to our relationship with the Census bill sponsor, the Children's Advocacy Alliance is being responsible for drafting the bill language that will create the 2020 Census Commission. So that will include the membership of the commission as well as the duties and distribution of the funds that will be being allocated through the governor's executive budget. So we're very excited about that opportunity and making sure that we're including representatives from the early childhood community, from school districts, as well as some of the other hard-to-count populations. And then we're also doing a lot to work to engage media and integrate this effort into our existing activities. So one of those is our Children's Week at the Legislature, which is coming up the week of March 11th. So we'll be hosting a press conference, putting information out around the legislative building to not only inform policymakers in the Capitol, but also to help educate the hundreds of people who will be there to participate in Children's Week. So with that, I am happy to pass on.
Hi, this is Margaret Nemo Holland. I'm the Executive Director of Voices for Virginia's Children. Happy to be joining this call. And I'm going to figure out, there we go, how to advance the slides. It's really interesting to hear about what everyone else is doing. We have, if y'all have followed the national news, a very interesting situation here in Virginia generally with politics, and that is affecting everything, including the census. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The landscape in Virginia for those of you who don't know, going back 10 years, we really have no track record of strong state support for the census. So the Northam administration is really starting from scratch in terms of how to do a complete count commission, the idea of even allocating funds toward the census. So we really are starting pretty much from scratch. We have advocated for months, actually, for there to be a complete count commission started by the governor, and it took a while, but we finally have a complete count commission. There have been 2 meetings so far, and we are a member of that commission. It's a great group, about 40 individuals representing the geographic and racial and ethnic diversity of our state, and I think it will be a positive and hopefully fruitful group and effort, but it is starting a little late and has taken a little bit to get its legs under it. Our 3rd meeting is next week, and we're hoping that work groups will be formed so we can really start getting down to the meat of the work. Because there has not been a strong track record in Virginia, there was not a lot of emphasis placed on funding state-level activities. The governor did finally put in $1.5 million in his budget, but both the House and the Senate budget stripped it out. Where we are in Virginia, we do have a legislative session every year. They are very short, and we are in a short year. They alternate every other year, so it's 45 days this year. We are set to adjourn on Saturday. So we are awaiting the final compromise budget, which we think will come out today or tomorrow and then be voted on. And I think the odds are really long that there will be any state funding for the census. A very powerful budget conferee on the House side, a Republican delegate, has been telling everyone that he thinks the census is a federal responsibility and that the state should not be funding it. So that kind of gives you a little bit of the attitude about it. And then, of course, the governor is not in a real strong position to be able to advocate for his budget priorities, even if this were a stronger priority than I think it started out being. So that's, I think, where we're going to be. And then session does not come back around until next January. So in terms of Virginia, we are a large state. We are very diverse. We are home to 511,000 plus young children under the age of 5, and as everyone knows on this call, that is the most difficult to count or most likely to be missed. We're trying to develop messaging around the fact that there are hard-to-count communities all over the state, but we do have to call out especially Northern Virginia, which is the most populous and most diverse part of our state. And in fact, a quarter of all young children in the state live in Northern Virginia. So that is obviously going to be an area of focus for us, not the only one, but an important area of focus. So what's at stake in Virginia? Like my counterparts in other states, we have looked at the materials about what we stand to lose. Something that we have learned that might be useful to others, there's actually about $10 billion in annual federal funding that comes to Virginia that's based on census data. But because we are a state with an FMAP of 50%, as low as it can go, our federal matching rate for things like Medicaid, we only stand to lose funding from an undercount for these programs that are up on the slide. So about $5 million in annual federal funding is at stake if we have an undercount. So that could be an important distinction for other states who are in that same position of having a 50% FMAP. So what we are doing at Voices are a number of things. We're working on a number of different fronts, and of course the undercount of young children is the main focus of our work, but we see a role to play in many areas. So we actually started out doing a series of video blogs, just very short informational things that we were able to circulate on social media about the importance of the census, why it matters to Virginia, that it's even coming up and people need to pay attention, and we will be continuing that video series. You can check that out on our website. We were appointed to the Complete Count Commission and have in fact provided some behind-the-scenes advising to the Secretary of the Commonwealth, which is where the Complete Count Commission is housed in Virginia. She does not have a lot of experience running this type of commission, and so we were trying to be helpful in terms of thinking about parallels in terms of outreach around children's health insurance. I think it would be sort of a similar thought process to that. And so I think some of those conversations that we have had with her and her staff have been helpful, and hopefully we'll get things moving along with the Complete Count Commission. We are, of course, not the only folks in Virginia who are concerned about the census and getting a complete count. Our Civic Engagement Table has formed a Complete Counts Coalition that we are a part of, and we both actually have received funding from the national funders who are interested in census work to do complementary activities around ensuring that we get a complete count in Virginia. So we're excited about that, which is just getting going. So sort of the premise of our grant-funded work to work on the census is really making use of our partnerships and our nonpartisan reputation, which is something that one of the other speakers brought up as being really important. In a state like Virginia that's very purple and seems to, the fate of one party or another seems to change on a daily basis here, it's really important that we're able to communicate and position this issue as one that is really nonpartisan and important to everyone in Virginia. So we're going to start out by working with Bill O'Hare, who, as you may know, is a demographer. He is the former Kids Count Director at Annie E. Casey, and he happened to have retired to the Eastern Shore of Virginia, which is fabulous for us. So he is serving on the Complete Count Commission, and he is going to be helping us identify child-specific hard-to-count data specifically for Virginia so that we can then use that data to know where we need to target our efforts. So we're excited about that. We will be doing a communications plan around our census work to make sure that we have all the audiences that we want to hit in mind. And our communications director, Christina Furyk, will actually be doing a peer-to-peer match with the folks at NC Child. We're really excited about that. And the project they will be working on together is our communications plan for the census work, and that's about to get going. Our grant proposal involved working with sort of two sets of organizations where we felt like we had credibility and could do outreach to the families, ultimately, where these hard-to-count young kids are. So the first strategy is working with community foundations, and there's a reason that we started there. So I mentioned Northern Virginia and how populated and diverse it is and how many of the state's young children are there. So the folks in Northern Virginia know that, and the Northern Virginia Community Foundation, which is a regional foundation, has actually started their own census work. They've hired someone to work part-time to connect the work of the Complete Count committees in those jurisdictions in Northern Virginia to work together and help amplify the outreach and communications. So that was a natural fit for us to work with the Northern Virginia Community Foundation. And then the foundation in Richmond, the area around our capital, is starting to stick its toe in the water. They have an engagement person on their staff who is sitting on Richmond's Complete Count Committee. So we saw that as an opening to push it a little bit further. And we're excited because they are the entity in this area that does a lot of the nonprofit training, so on all different topics, but it's a great opportunity. They've promised us an opportunity in 2019 and again in 2020 to be able to do an educational session for them that would bring in lots of folks from child-serving nonprofits in the Richmond area to let them know about the importance of the census and what they can do about it. We plan to reach out to other community foundations around the state as well, but those are the two that have sort of taken a leap into this topic area, whereas the others have not yet. And then we'll also finally be working with the local government associations in Virginia. There are three: the Municipal League for Cities, the Association of Counties, and First Cities, which is an organization representing a handful of urban areas in the state. And they have a very robust membership. We are advocacy partners with them frequently at the General Assembly, and so we are a trusted resource for them, and they have lots of regular communications channels from conferences to emails to newsletters, so all kinds of ways that we can communicate with their members and hopefully persuade them to set up complete count committees and help them if they are interested, and then get messaging around young children. So I think, like the other presenters were talking about, we feel like we know from the research that being a trusted messenger is really important. We know that we as child advocates are not necessarily the trusted messenger directly to the parents of young children and their families, but we certainly are to the child-serving organizations who work with those families. So we are really trying to get the message out to those trusted messengers, get the materials in their hands, and work this campaign through the census. Debbie, happy to turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. I was just checking that. In fact, I had turned my mute off, and I did. First of all, I want to make sure that everyone remembers that if you have questions for our speakers, you use that participant feedback box in the bottom left of your screen. That way we can make sure people don't talk over each other or wait for others to speak, that you can get your question in. Before we take the first question, I do want to say that we were scheduled to originally have a fourth speaker, Amber Wallen from New Mexico, but unfortunately she got a last-minute request to speak at the New Mexico State Legislature in a hearing, and so she was unable to join us today, and she apologizes for that. At some point we will try and see if there's an opportunity to put her and a couple of other people on. I also want to flag for you a couple of things before we go to the questions. One is we have one more of these webinars. On Monday, February 25th, we're going to have Rhonda from Voices for Alabama's Children, who is going to talk about working with their county children's policy councils, because in Alabama every county has one. Peter from New Jersey is going to talk about working with the early childhood community in municipalities. Heather Hanna and Rachel Haggard in Mississippi are going to talk about some of their data work to figure out where kids are most likely to be missed, and also some of their statewide community meetings and message feedback. Stephanie Geller from Rhode Island Kids Count is going to talk about their, they were the only state in the country that had an end-to-end test, so she's going to talk some about that and their census solution events. And Rebecca Rice from Georgia is going to talk about their work with state agencies. All of them have other topics as well, but I did want to give you a flavor of how every group is different, and even if you were on this webinar, you may well want to listen to the one on Monday. I also want to make sure that you know that you can get more information about the Young Child Undercount at our website, countallkids.org, that you can watch the first webinar at the link up there, and I will be sending these slides and the recording to everyone, and you can register for the third one at that link. So again, if you've got questions, please put them in the participant feedback, and I have one here that really I think could be answered by any of our participants. It is from Allison. How are you including home visiting programs that work with parents in the prenatal to 5 years, such as parents as teachers in the mix? And why don't we start with Denise and maybe then Margaret and Amy, if you want to comment on that too.
Sure. Thank you, Deb. And Allison, in response to your question, one of the things that we're doing in this phase is we work very closely with our State Early Childhood Advisory Council. We've actually been added as a standing agenda item to give updates to that council on the status of the 2020 census, as well as to take input on outreach to the early childhood community and to those providers. So we have a few different home visiting programs in the state of Nevada that are all a part of that council. So that's one way right now that we're working to educate and inform them and get feedback on some of those efforts. As we move forward in developing both they start to do more work with our local committees and our statewide committee, we'll be doing specific outreach to those populations. It's our hope and likely will happen that our organization will be able to lead kind of the subcommittee looking at the count of all young children. So we'll be working specific. We've already got the list of those groups that we'll be reaching out to with materials and educational opportunities and ways to provide input.
So this is Margaret. I would say in Virginia, Voices for Virginia's Children partners all the time with our home visitors. We have an umbrella organization in Virginia called Early Impact for all the home visiting groups, but we also work with them individually. They're part of our Early Childhood Policy Network, and they're also part of our group that we've assembled around our unified policy agenda for trauma. So we have lots of different ways that we reach out to them, but I do think that that home visitors are a really important audience for what we're doing, and I think they're sort of on all of our lists and groups that we work with and speak to frequently. So they will definitely be part of our important strategy.
And this is Amy, and kind of ditto in the sense we're also on our state's Early Childhood Council. And a lot of our advocacy partners are from that field. And one thing that I would love for us to find funds to do here in Kentucky, specific to the early childhood sector, both for child care centers as well as the home visiting programs we have in the state, are funds to work with a graphic designer to develop, so whether it's poster-sized materials to put up in child care centers, whether it's kind of brochures or flyers for home visiting workers to give out to their young families, but something that translates the messaging, research that's coming out about what resonates in terms of convincing parents to include their children and the importance of a full and accurate count, but in a way that where the language really speaks to them and the visuals speak to them as a parent of young children, because no offense, but I think the Census Bureau will be the first to admit that they don't have the funds to put out materials that are differentially targeting all of the different populations. So that's something we would love to do, is materials that really speak to that population and get those disseminated.
So this is Debbie, and I just want to say that the partnership is doing message research around how to persuade families with young children, and we will be creating materials that you will be able to pull down from our website. I don't know yet if we will have a printing budget. But there will be materials like that. They'll probably be available late spring, early summer, somewhere in there. And I say families intentionally because we think it's important to reach not just parents but other members in the family, since in complex households it's not always the parent who fills out the form. So please, if you have not already signed up at Count All Kids to get our emails, please do so, because that way when our message materials are available and our outreach materials are available, you get them. We have a question here from Terry Ann Lowenthal, which is for any speaker. Do you think pediatricians in hospitals, maternity wards particularly, will be helpful? And I would add to Terry's question, what about obstetricians? So I don't know who wants to try and take that one first.
This is Denise. If I could address that, it's one of the areas that I actually didn't mention in my presentation. I think they're critically important. We're working pretty closely with our Nevada chapter of the American Association of Pediatrics, working with our policy committees. We're also, one of the things that we were able to get set up pretty early on is putting together a census flyer and having that included in our pink packet, which here are the packets that go out to every person in the state of Nevada who gives birth in a hospital. So we now, starting actually last month, every person who gives birth in the state will have a census flyer. But I also think the OBGYNs are important as well. And so working, I think one way to reach some of them, and we've done some of this, is not only through the AAP, but also through the State Medical Association or the local medical associations, to get those individuals on board.
This is Margaret. I would just add in Virginia, the Hospital Association is actually a member of the Complete Count Commission, which I think is pretty important and brilliant. I would also just say that we are looking at, in our local hospital systems, I think when you go back to that whole idea of who the trusted messengers are, for certain communities in the Richmond area at least, there is a caravan that one of the hospital systems puts out, which is like a mobile healthcare access, vaccination, that sort of thing, for low-income communities. And in particular, it serves a lot of folks in our Latino community. And so I think that is definitely going to be a hard-to-count community, and those are folks who are trusted messengers. So I think that we need to think really broadly about hospitals and healthcare providers in terms of being those trusted messengers.
Thank you. Amy, I don't know if you want to add to that or not.
I don't think I have anything to add beyond what they said. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to ask everybody, if you've got a question, to go ahead and put it in now. Otherwise, we will wrap up. And while we do that, I do want to say, first of all, thank you so much to all of our speakers. I think this was a fabulous webinar with a lot of ideas that I hope people will integrate into your own work on the census, whether or not you're specifically focusing on young children. And I, for one, find it exciting to see all the different approaches that everyone can use. It's looking like no one else has a question, and so I am going to say thank you to everyone and have a wonderful day. Stay safe if you're in the snow area. And I look forward to having many of you join us again on Monday at 2:30. I will say Monday we are at 2:30 because there's a message webinar from the Funders Committee from 1 to 2, so you might want to look for that. I'll send the link for that when I send out these recordings. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for working on the census. I'm going to stop the recording now.